Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you. My name is Nabil Susu, and I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Denison Consulting. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's presentation, Smart Moves for Tough Times, hosted by Greg Bliss, Senior Denison Consultant and President of Bliss Training and Consulting. Bliss Training and Consulting has been around for 20 years, delivering learning designs and assessments dedicated to helping individuals, teams, and organizations foster their skills, knowledge, and culture needed to reach their maximum potential. Greg also has extensive experience in utilizing Denison solutions in medium and large organizations across different verticals. We're delighted he's hosting this session today. A few items to share with you before we get started. Please send your questions in the chat box on your screen. We will do our best to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be archived. You are welcome to share it. If you have any further questions about Denison Solutions or require further information about our upcoming workshops, please send me an email. We hope you'll enjoy this presentation and find it useful in your quest to sustain through these times and prosper in the very near future. Thank you.
And thank you, Nabil. And thanks to Denison Consulting for sponsoring this webinar, Smart Moves for Tough Times. You know, I'd like to share with everybody in our webinar audience a little bit about the impetus for where this webinar came from. I, like all of you, were probably inundated with the gloom and doom messages that were out there. And in fact, an email came across my inbox from the McKinsey group that had just published a survey about company boards of directors. And the majority of those boards of directors felt that they had let their organizations down, that they had not directed those organizations well. So as a leader, as a consultant, and as a trainer, what are some of the smart moves for right now? That's what I went in search of. I looked at my own experience, and I looked at a lot of literature and a lot of actions that are out there in the marketplace right now, and those are what I'd like to share with you today. So thanks for joining us. We realize that everybody has a scarcity of time and money, and while this webinar is free, it does cost you about 40 minutes, and we promise to make it worth your while. There are multiple ways to interact with the presentation. You're all in audience listening only mode, which means I'm the only voice that you're going to hear. Otherwise, we would have a cacophony of background noise and things going on. So there are still ways to interact. We'll have several poll questions throughout our presentation. You can submit online questions via the chat box, and there'll be an exit survey as well. So let's look at today's objectives. Principally, they are these three: to outline the three key enablers organizations must focus on right now to sustain themselves, illustrate the vital role that culture, the way we do things around here, and core values play in navigating tough times, and provide those smart moves and real-world examples, not that worked before or last week, but are working right now and will enable you to come out the other side of this crisis whole and ready to compete. So let's move on to our first polling question. And we're going to open the poll right now. So it'll be about 30 seconds with which you can answer. Here's the question. Have you in the last year, whether you're a consultant, answer for one of your organizations, or if you're a part of an organization, answer for your own organization, laid off employees, acquired another company, trimmed company travel, reduced training and spending, or restructured? Go ahead. You can pick all that apply. The poll is open now, and we'll leave it open for probably another 15 seconds. By the way, if you're attending this webinar as part of a group, build a quick consensus for which one of those things you think is happening in your organization, and then click in. We're monitoring the way that things are going, and it looks as though most people have answered. So let's look at the results from our poll. There's the polling question, and it looks about half of our webinar audience have laid off employees. Wow, we've trimmed company travel, we've reduced training spending, and restructured to increase the operational efficiency. So it's safe to say more than one of those actions is happening within most of the organizations that are visiting with us on this webinar today. So the conclusion that we can draw from all of that is I think that we can collectively say that we're all feeling slammed. Not many of us saw this coming, and that radical actions based on that poll are being used to save the companies that we are a part of or that we're consulting with. One of the ways that that's been traditionally done has been slash and burn cost cutting to preserve the company in the short term. An article came out in February of this year in the Harvard Business Review, and I wanted to read just a quick quote from it. It said that companies that injudiciously slash market spending often find that they later must spend far more than they saved in order to recover. So indiscriminate slash and burn is not one of the things that we are espousing. We've got some other smart moves that we'd like to share with you. And we also want to talk to you a little bit about this time, the context. This is a quote. This title is from Dan Denison, a good friend of ours at Denison Consulting. Never waste a good crisis. We've found that throughout history, and history will bear this out, that downturns trigger the most active periods of innovation. And in fact, crisis is a form of forced change. Normally, change in organizations, as we look at it, is more about enrolling people, getting everybody to see the whys, and there are always outliers that are not down with the change. But crisis really forces everybody to say, yep, can't do things the way we've done them. So change is a given. And following tough times, the logos on the bottom of your screen right here are all people, all innovators who have emerged healthier, more competitive than they were during that crisis. So the question to all of you out there who are in the audience is, will you be the next logo on the bottom of this slide? We hope you will, and we hope you'll enjoy the things that we have to say around what we're calling 3 key enablers to thrive. In short, they are flexibility, self-awareness, and resiliency. And we've got some smart moves around each one of these enablers. Now, a word about these 3. Where did they come from? I was reading an article recently in the McKinsey Quarterly, that being December of 2008, and these were referenced in there. And I thought they might be a good framework for thinking about those real-world smart moves that can help you as a corporation remain flexible, help your self-awareness, and stay resilient in these tough times. So what we'll do is we'll go through each one of the enablers, one at a time, and give you some key leader actions. So let's look first at flexibility. The leader actions under this one that we're espousing are, 1, to really remain agile, to build an innovation pipeline, and then use a strategic thinking process and decision process called if-then thinking. Let's get a little bit deeper into each one of these. First, smart moves that help companies remain agile. Now, obviously it goes without saying that the best time to generate options and debate their merits is prior to a downturn. But a downturn is also an appropriate time for when people have to look and generate options for how they're going to deal with a crisis. The poll question is a perfect example of how some of our audience has dealt with them thus far. But all the strategic options that you have in your plan, either whether you're generating it now or whether you've already generated one, have to be planned for and budgeted. And one of the key things about supporting innovation in an organization is that you want to have those expenditures for these innovations, whether they be coming out of R&D or the business units, be under a separate budget category. So slash and burn, when you're trying to be operationally efficient, cannot touch these. You're preserving your ability to innovate during these tough times. One of the organizations that I do some work for is Frito-Lay. And Frito-Lay routinely updates its multiple Plan B scenarios. I was in a meeting earlier this year, and they're on plan. Things are going well. In fact, in some cases, they're ahead of plan. But that doesn't mean the marketplace will change, that competitors will come in with new offerings, or that something will radically shift the landscape. Well, they've got those options, and they've got funding for those options to respond. So they have a toolkit of actions already in play, and that's something that every organization should have. A watch out around remaining agile, and especially if you're a consultant listening to this, look at leadership and see if this is happening to them. But leaders in organizations, when times get really tough, tunnel vision happens, and they employ the same solutions that worked for them in the past. Why? It's human nature, and it's also the stakes are high, so they've got to come up with things that have worked. So naturally, they go to the things that they have used before, but that's not necessarily the thing that is going to solve that in this situation or in the future. So look at your leadership, make sure that they are also being agile in the way that they are deciding about leadership actions and not going for tunnel vision and using a very narrow focus on that. That's around the first action leadership skill of agility. Now, let's go on to building an innovation pipeline. And by this, really what we're espousing is that you have a portfolio of innovation, just like you have, in your personal financial situation, a portfolio of different things that do well at different times or are for different kinds of conditions. You've got short-term incremental ideas, and these are mostly evolutionary ideas, ones that can be driven by the business units themselves. And then you've got longer-term revolutionary ideas that have to be, driven by the top of the organization and funded separately from a business unit perspective. But what we want you to make sure is that these options are sustaining your core business, that you're not going into innovation or doing acquisitions that are outside, because one, those take too long to ramp up. They're not very profitable at the beginning, and they drain resources from your core business, so they put you in jeopardy. So make sure you're building an innovation pipeline within your core business. Okay, let's say you're agile. Let's say you've got that innovation pipeline. How do you decide which innovation to pull the trigger on? We like to use if-then thinking. We use this very successfully with a lot of our clients. The premise is this. If we do a certain action, then we can expect a certain outcome. We've got a couple of examples on this frame for you. One of them, developing new offerings. Well, if we do that, then we can grow the category, and so on. Interestingly enough, we were very selective, and we altered a word in that first if-then statement. It used to read, develop new products. And we came off of that. We think that there's a lot of things that aren't new products that can be done. And I have a great example for you. It can be an innovation, it can be a positioning, it can be a marketing idea. And during the Super Bowl, Hyundai did just this. What they did was they said, buy a car from us. And if you lose your job after this, no problem, just return the car. Well, we all know the dire straits that the auto industry is in. And in the midst of that, what Hyundai did was they took the fear out of the equation. Did they have any new products? No. They just took a barrier to purchase away from the consumer. And so amidst all the blood and the gloom and doom in the auto industry, Hyundai is up 4% since the Super Bowl. Here are some other people who have used if-then thinking to make acquisitions in their core business. One of them is strategic, that being IBM and Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems really provides some services that IBM desperately needed. The other one, the bottom one, Pfizer and Wyeth, is a defensive acquisition. Let me give you some stats. Since 2000, Pfizer has spent $60 billion in R&D and brought no new products to the marketplace. That's a lot of dollars. When they bought Wyeth, they have 3 new products to bring to the marketplace. They bought them for $62 billion. So almost 8 or 9 years in $60 billion versus making this acquisition, R&D, especially in the pharmaceutical category, is not really the way to create innovation. You create innovation by buying either small biotech companies or people who have a pipeline. But that category is not one that is generating via R&D its own pipeline. So that was a defensive strategic acquisition. Okay. Those are some leadership actions around the idea of flexibility, our first enabler. And so that brings us to a poll question, another opportunity for you to interact and give us some feedback. And we're asking for your opinion here. So the question is, and our poll is open now, which one of these acquisitions will generate the most return for its stakeholders? So pick one. Will it be Delta and Northwest, Pfizer and Wyeth, Wells Fargo and Wachovia, and we're saying that with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, and then IBM and Sun Microsystems. So go ahead, vote, and if you're part of a group, come to consensus and log in with your votes right now. Many of you have already given your vote. And we're going to close the poll at this time, and we will show you the results. Here are where the bets are. IBM and Sun Microsystems, by far and away, is the one that people are betting on. And a couple people have a sense of humor with Wells Fargo and Wachovia right now. The other player, Pfizer and Wyeth. So the two that we previewed were the two most popular choices. Well, time will tell, and we'll all look in on what happens in the next 6, 8, 9 months to a year. Let's go on at this time to our second enabler, which is self-awareness. And I really like this one because apart from agility, which has other components to it that are short-term or long-term, this is something that is absolutely essential that you do to be successful, whether times are good or times are bad. Assess regularly. Use an objective outside survey measurement tool to get an MRI of the organization. But also listen to the whole organization and all of the frontline pain that's bubbling up, whether they be things that are obstacles to doing well or solutions for that, must be heard and valued on a regular basis in order to have a healthy dialogue in your organization. Also, we want you to be vigilant, to turn around and think like a competitor and look at your organization from the outside in. And finally, to promote partnership. Bring all the people who impact your business and the delivery of your customer service closer to you as opposed to pushing them away or squeezing them. So let's look at each one of these leadership actions in more detail. Right off the top, Nabil said, I'm a senior consultant with Denison, and so I firmly believe in the Denison Culture Survey as a very, very robust, objective assessment that can accurately give you a read on your organization. There are 4 core traits. How are we delivering on our mission? Consistency. Do we leverage the organization to actually fulfill the mission? Involvement. How engaged is our employee population and adaptability? Do we know our customer in the marketplace? And are we set up to actually serve them? Are great sort of bedrock things that all companies need to answer for themselves. So whether it's Denison or something else, make sure that your tool has direct links to business performance. We like Denison because we can extrapolate from the circumplex and from the data that we get what the response in the marketplace is going to be. You can also gauge the connectedness of the organization and uncover potential talent management issues. The interesting thing about whether it's Denison or whatever tool you're using in your organizations that's important is that this data then is the basis for other dialogues that you're having. You want to prove this and really put some legs in the whys and wherefores of this data through your employee population, through looking at your organization from the outside in, and through your vendor population as well. So let's look at all those tools and what you want to learn. Obviously, listening to the whole organization, we talked about the pain is sometimes on the front line. And right before this webinar, I was talking with Dan Denison about some of the audiences where you can really get an accurate read of what's going on. your sales organization is one of those. Your customer service organization is one of those. That's where you're either getting a no or a yes. And so they know why you're losing business. They know why you're getting business. So bubbling that information up from the bottom of the organization is something that is of critical importance. The other thing that's of critical importance is an objective survey isn't really going to give you an emotional read on your organization. So management by walking around, really looking at having some informal discussions in the break room with workers is a way to kind of get at the mood, the tenor of the organization, and that has an impact, especially as we looked at our poll question right up front. People had done some organizational restructuring. When that happens, roles are up for grabs, and so there's usually confusion in organization, and in this time of crisis, confusion and fear equal lack of productivity, lack of product quality. So being close to that is incredibly important for your organization. Beyond looking inwards at your organization, look from the outside in. Ask your good customers, ask your good clients, those people who you will trust to give you honest answers. How can someone take my business? Better business intelligence begets better decision making. So gain insights into competitive strategies by talking to your customers and asking them some of these questions. What do they hear about competitors from other vendors? Are suppliers being approached by your competitors? And if so, what kind of value proposition are they trying to use to lure them away? And are you vulnerable to what that value proposition is? So being vigilant here can allow you to make some quick moves inside your organization that can shore up your business in the short term. And finally, promote partnership. It's very easy, and the default behavior a lot of times with vendors is, hey, we're not getting the same margins, we're not getting the same dollars for the value that we're providing, so we're going to pass that on to you. Don't squeeze your suppliers for concessions. Partner with them. Bring them onto your side, bring them closer to you, and make them partners in solving those joint problems. How can we, as a virtual organization with your outside vendors, lower overhead, increase the expertise that we're delivering, be really agile and change to meet the evolving needs of the customer? The result can be some operational efficiencies and maybe even some cost savings. And it'd be great, I don't know the relationships you have with partners, but you know, sharing in the profits if that's in the cards. But there is one thing, if you're going to do this, and this is why culture is key. You've got to align the culture of your vendors with the culture of your organization if you're actually going to maximize the value proposition to the people that you're serving. So that's something that is an enabler that will help this problem-solving process. We've gone through some self-awareness kinds of things, knowing thyself, if you will. And now we'd like to ask you this poll question. The poll is open right now, and it is this: which of these self-assessment smart moves that we've been talking about are you doing in your organization now? If you're a consultant, answer for an organization that you know well and are working with, and maybe you're helping them do some of these, or maybe you know about some initiatives to assess the organization. So answer from that perspective. Go ahead. We'll keep the poll open for probably another 20 seconds. All right, one of our technicians, Ari Black, is monitoring the responses as they're coming in. He's giving us the thumbs up, and so let's put your responses out there. Okay. So objective assessment, about 40%. Knowing thyself, looking at the emotional mood and evaluating yourself from the outside in. Good, about, I would say, between 40 and 50% for each one of those. I can't stress enough that it's important that you do the full sort of basket of assessment, not just one, to really know yourselves, because it will help you with the agility piece, being flexible, and also our final enabler, which is entitled resiliency. So, resilient leader actions. And again, we have 4. Promoting information flow in your organization, clarifying roles and responsibility, training for the future, and making sure that innovation is supported through your organization. So let's look at some of the smart moves regarding resilient leader actions. If you're a fan of the Matrix, this is going to be a very familiar graphic to you. But it also, I want to reference the first poll question. And in that first poll question, there were a lot of people who had reorganized their organization. That's great, because either out of necessity or whether your organization was siloed, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions that are trying to break down those silos, are trying to create those operational efficiencies. And one of the things they do is restructure. Well, in restructuring, I have a story for you, and this comes from our good friends at McDonald's. They have a category called menu management, and menu management really is a fancy name for new product development. And new product development, traditionally, about 10 years ago, had been done via test kitchens. They'd come up with new product offerings in different categories. And at that time, they had 2 ideas in their pipeline. Well, instead of doing that, they reorganized and created small business teams. It was on a cross-functional platform, so they had the food engineer, they had the marketing folks, they had the finance folks, and they had supply chain, all working on building the business case for a product. And teams had multiple products. After 1 year of instituting this, and there was a little pain in getting to this cross-functional collaborative platform, but they had 26 products, more than they could put into their pipeline. So all of a sudden, their innovation pipeline is full, and they were choosing amongst many right answers so that they couldn't lose. And McDonald's, over the last 5 years, if you've looked at their business results, same-store sales are up consistently for the last 5 years. So, making sure that the organization and information flow is right is one of the things. Now, as soon as you reorganize, or even if you're not reorganizing, straight talk is incredibly important in your organization to keep the momentum going and keep the morale up of the employee population. So shoot straight with employees. Don't put a good face on this bad time, because people will see right through that, and so you'll lose your credibility. Really what you want to do is have simple, clear messages regarding the crisis that have 4 parts to them. So the first thing is to communicate the current status with unfiltered honesty. Things are bad, and how they're bad. Demonstrate that you know and you have empathy for that. Convey that you fully grasp the challenge ahead for the organization. That's part number 2. Then 3, and this is incredibly important, right after you fully grasp that challenge ahead, lay out the game plan for addressing it. And then finally, the 4th part is specify what you as a leader are going to take accountability for, and detail what employees' roles and responsibilities are in resolving this crisis, whatever it might be. Many of you said you restructured. Restructuring brings about a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, a lot of people holding on to information, so that the faster that you can clarify roles, the better off you are. A rugby team, a cycling team, any kind of team knows exactly what its roles are, what its functions are, and the faster that we delineate those, the faster we can go from transforming to reforming to getting back up to a norming and a productive place within the organization. So make sure that you're clarifying roles early and often in the process following a reorganization. And finally, training. Many of you said that you'd cut training. And so how do we get those skills back in our organization? Well, I love this Muhammad Ali quote. The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road long before I dance under the lights. So let's say, to use this metaphor, that the lights are in that recovery phase that we know is coming. To prepare now, even if you have no training budget, you've got to think about the skills that are going to be needed for the organization when it exits. And so if you train for today, you're going to lose tomorrow. You have to train for tomorrow to win tomorrow. How do you do that? Well, there are a lot of ways to do it. You can do action learning teams. You can use mentors. You can have subject matter experts who are partnering and working with others within the organization. So there's a lot of things that don't take a lot of money that still can build skill. Admittedly, it takes more time to train a skill than it is to buy a skill. So when things are good again, one of the things that you have to think about is whether you're going to buy skill or whether you're going to train skill. And finally, you may recognize the Geico money guy staring at you. Here's an interesting stat regarding R&D. During the Great Depression, at least 73 organizations either chartered new R&D departments or increased funding for existing R&D functions. So during that time of greatest innovation, those were the companies that benefited from it, that did not undercut their R&D or their IT spending. IT, managing and measuring the right things so you can make the right decisions about R&D development, about your product pipeline, about what the marketplace is and what your responses are to it. Those are really your two support lifelines in getting through a crisis like this. So we've gone through our three enablers, and I really thank you for your attention and your polling and the information that we're getting back from you. But I want to leave you with this. A recovery will happen. It's inevitable. It's always happened before, and it will happen again. And we really believe that these kinds of moves, these smart moves, will better position you for the recovery when it happens so that you can sustain your organization. So that's the end of our formal presentation, and what we'd like to do now is entertain some questions. And to do that, you can go into your chat box. Some questions have been coming in, and we'll start, we've been sifting through those, and Karen Luce from Denison Consulting has been helping us with that. And Karen, do you have a question that you've already got?
I do have a couple questions for you, Greg. Our first question is, of the three enablers that you mentioned, if you had to pick just one, which do you think is the most important for a company to focus their energies on?
Well, that's a good question, and I think we don't have a source for who brought that one in. But I really think all three are important, but for my mind, the self-awareness piece is really the foundational piece because it allows you to think about what flexibility looks like and what resiliency looks like. If you aren't self-aware about yourself internally and yourself externally, it's tough to make those decisions. So if I had to choose just one, as this questionnaire is asking, I would choose self-awareness.
Okay. Our second questioner is asking, how does culture help us in these tough times?
Well, culture is really one of the anchors. Culture is the DNA of the organization, and as Denison likes to say, it's the way things are done around here. So if you are creating change in your organization that is outside of your cultural norms or doesn't fit those or the way that we do things around here, you've got some dissonance, and so that's an extra variable that you're dealing with. So culture can really be an enabler of change, or it can be an inhibitor of change, depending upon how you go about the change. Going back to that self-assessment piece from our first question, knowing your culture and knowing what will fly and what won't fly is very important to how you'll change. The other aspect of it is if you look at your culture and you say, well, we really need to have a different culture, you've got to work on your culture first before you can make that change. So culture really is the backdrop of which all change is driven by.
Okay, we have A third question. This one comes from one of our viewers in Ann Arbor. How do you reduce costs while maintaining your firm's competitive advantage so you get a quick start when the phones start ringing again?
Well, I think that's what everybody wants to know, so that's probably a universal question and a very good one. I think some of the things that we've talked about are really part of the answer to that. How do you reduce costs? Well, half the people in our poll reduce costs via shedding employees, having a layoff. One of the things about layoffs that's important is that you want to cut deeply enough so that you don't have another layoff, because layoffs in and of themselves will demotivate your workforce. Product quality will go down. People will be less clear about their jobs. If they have a job, they'll be lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs rather than using their skills. So how you lay off is incredibly important. The other thing is we talked about vendors and not squeezing them but partnering with them. So I think organizations in general are becoming a little bit more virtual. They're relying on outside suppliers and vendors for things that may have traditionally been inside. We're seeing lots of training departments go away. We're seeing lots of graphic or communication departments, non-essential skills, go away. So those things are coming from outside the organization. At the same time, you've got to have that product and innovation pipeline that's there. So while you're cutting costs, you've got to maintain the things that are going to generate revenue for you. So that's the short answer to that. What else is coming in?
Let's see, this one is, there's lots of good questions coming in here. It's hard to choose just one.
You know, the response has been an avalanche of questions that are piling in right now, and we really thank you for those responses. We aren't going to get to all of them as we're sifting through them in real time here, but we do have email addresses or sources for all of these questions. So if we don't answer them during the webinar, we will answer your question after the webinar personally via an email. Okay. Jerry Murphy has a question that is brought up, and I think it's a good one. We've just talked about how culture change is something that may be necessary in your organization to be successful over the long term. And Jerry's question is this: isn't the culture change timeline too long to make a difference before a recovery? And if you're doing them, as we originally suggested, sequentially, meaning that you've got to change the culture before you create the change initiative, the answer to that question, Jerry, is yes. But there's another way to do it as we're thinking about it, and that is to use an initiative both as a change initiative and a cultural development initiative. So I think that if you can combine those, you really have the best of both worlds, because if you've got to change the culture, you can also talk about the ground rules for being successful with this initiative, and you can use it to practice a culture change and whether you want to adopt that. So it can be very much a test case or a litmus case for if you can be successful operating that way. So I think there is sort of a simultaneous thing. Lots of other questions are coming in, and we're deluged. So we really thank you for that engagement and staying with us throughout this entire webinar. It's been my pleasure to share this information about these smart moves. And remember, everyone, that the recovery will come and that these smart moves will better position you for taking advantage of that recovery. Thanks for those questions that have come in. Again, we'll answer those via email, and you'll be getting a follow-up email that will include a link to this recording that you can share with others in your organization. So on behalf of Denison Culture, I want to thank everybody for their time and their attention, and this is the end of this Smart Moves for Tough Times webinar.